We're standing on guard, keeping an eye on the enemy, talking about matter security this morning. And we want to actually drill deeper right now on a very contentious topic that has come to the fore. The sentencing of 24-year-old Ruth Kamande to death has once again rekindled the debate on capital punishment. On one hand, there are those who have called for the commuting of a sentence to life imprisonment, which allows for the rehabilitation of offender. Others laud the sentence as appropriate given the nature of Kamande's crime. Kamande committed a grisly murder. Transcripts from the judgment hearing state that she stabbed her boyfriend Farid Mohammed 25 times, leading to his death. She ignored his cries for help and deliberately blocked his exit from the house, even as neighbors gathered and urged her to stop and open the door. The accused inflicted each stab not in a frenzy, as she alleged in her defense, but deliberately and intermittently. Her action was calculated to inflict pain and cause death slowly but assuredly. That is clear proof of malice, of spite, callousness, and hatred, Justice Jessie said in her judgment. Amnesty International Executive Director Irungu Houghton said in a statement that there is no credible evidence that the death penalty deters crime any better than other lawful punishments, and asked the courts to call for Kamande's rehabilitation. So this is what we want to discuss this morning, and of course none other than to start us off with that particular discussion other than the Executive Director of Amnesty International, Irungu Houghton, who is here to tell us why they're really fronting for this particular sentence to be commuted to a life sentence instead of, death penalty. Irungu.
So there are three major arguments that people make in favor of the death penalty. The first is that it acts as an effective deterrent on violent criminals. The second is that there is, by imprisoning people on a life imprisonment, it costs a tremendous amount of money for the taxpayers. And the third argument usually is the eye for an eye,
yes,
that violent crimes require violent state action. I think the three arguments are completely misplaced. I respect them, and I think a lot of Kenyans hold them, but I think they're misplaced. And I think we have to start with a historical analysis of the death penalty. So communities across Kenya have had death by punishment in their culture for many years now. But the introduction of the death penalty was really a colonial tool. It was used for two reasons, primarily. The first was to protect the state, and the second one was to protect white women, settlers, against black male subjects. And if you look at the numbers of death by punishment during the colonial period, what's interesting is that in 60 years of the colonial government, only about 500 people were killed. When you look at what happens during the state of emergency, that figure doubles in the space of 4 years. So essentially what we have is a colonial tool that has been long abandoned by democratic countries across the world. 2/3 of the world no longer use this. By continuing to maintain this as a possible sentencing, what we leave Kenya is we leave Kenya in the company of countries like Pakistan, like the United States of America, like Saudi Arabia. And these are not necessarily countries that, as a democratic country, we would necessarily want to be associated with. So I think the case of Ruth Kamande should be discussed not on her personality or what she has done, although there is evidence that she has actually reformed over the last 3 years and is one of Langata prison's best paralegals. So she has actually been working with others, other prisoners. But I think it's not the personality of Ruth Kamande we need to discuss this on. It is on the public interest nature of this case. That has been our position. We have pronounced ourselves on this, and we hope that she appeals this sentence. And as Amnesty, I think just to close this off, as Amnesty, we are in no doubt that the murder was the most foul, was a violent crime. We grieve with the community and family of Farid Mohammed, but we simply hold that death penalty does not effectively deter violence, nor do we need to return to mob violence through the arm of a state in order to deal with criminals.
Right, and of course we know that maybe you can give us a very limpid understanding, clarity on this, just make it very crystal for us that the mandatory death sentence was declared unconstitutional in the Supreme Court in December last year, when two convicts on death row, that was Karioko Muruatetu,
Francis Muruatetu,
and Wilson Dirimburi Mwangi, they argued that it impugned the rights to life. So if it was declared unconstitutional, how did they go full steam ahead, of course, and also meted out this particular justice to Ruth Kamande?
I think there's been a raging debate over the death penalty over some years, and for legal practitioners, a number of arguments have been advanced. As we all know, Kenya currently has slightly in excess of 4,500 individuals on death row, and the number keeps on increasing. And as we also well know that the last time an execution took place in Kenya was in 1997, that then means we have a huge number of individuals who have continued remaining incarcerated contrary to the orders of the court. These are individuals who are convicted and sentenced to hang. And as such, their continued incarceration would constitute cruel, inhuman, degrading treatment and punishment. And those individuals can ably make arguments for compensation for the entire duration in which they have been held without those warrants being executed. That is one argument on where we find ourselves as a country. Yes, it is true that there is overwhelming support for retention of the death penalty, as was witnessed in Bomas during the constitutional making process and subsequently. However, it is not apparent to the Kenyans and the ardent supporters of retention of the death penalty that nobody has been executed, and it does not appear feasible that we shall have close to 5,000 people being executed in one swoop. As an institution and as a legal practitioner, I would concur that the continued incarceration of individuals who are supposed to be hanged, so to speak, contravenes their rights. Now, another school of argument has been that the judicial officers adjudicating disputes in which one can be convicted and sentenced to hang have always been constrained in that the sentence as prescribed is fixed, and the judicial officers then cannot exercise their discretion on sentencing. And I think the Supreme Court of Kenya, in its wisdom, did consider that fact and did concur with the appellant, that is Muruatetu. At the moment, I know there is a process ongoing on how to actualize the decision of the court to enable judicial officers exercise discretion when sentencing. And the factors then to consider are the mitigating circumstances of the particular case. And that in itself is also pointing towards a direction where it is not a must that everybody who kills must be sentenced to hang. And it is also not a must that anybody who might have been involved in a robbery with violence must be sentenced to hang. However, the judiciary and all actors in the criminal justice chain are actually, at the moment, undertaking exercise towards operationalizing the decision of the Supreme Court as to how all the cases that have piled up, as to how those cases can further be reviewed with a view of meting the appropriate sentence. The reason why that is important is because if an individual is accused of being a mugger, and during the mugging he used threatening words, and maybe he wielded a penknife, if found guilty, that individual will be convicted and sentenced to hang, irrespective of the circumstances of the case. And I think that has also contributed to a huge number. The figure I've just quoted is close to 10% of the current prison population. Our capacity is less than 20,000. Our prison facilities are already overflowing. And I think we have to look at it from that perspective. And the meting of the death sentence is not enforced. So we end up sending a huge number of individuals on death row who will not be allowed to participate in all the other activities that are geared towards rehabilitating the individual. So they will not work. They will just stay in their cubicles, in their cells for years, And as the number keeps on swelling, soon we shall again be discussing, do we need much more huger facilities? Because we are now keeping people, death row inmates, sexual offenders constitute the hugest bulk of individuals in our penal system today. And these are people who go in there for a very long haul.
Thank you. Right, let's say from Collins, because I do not really follow. When they say it is unconstitutional, then they say that also this means that the judges still retain the discretion to hand down the death penalty, but there is no room to sentence convicts to a lesser punishment instead. What does it mean? It is unconstitutional, then you have a discretion again.
And that's what I wanted to clarify.
Yes.
I think because we also need to be fair to Judge Lesit. Judge Lesit did nothing unconstitutional. I think that everybody must be able to realize. What the Supreme Court in Francis Muruate did was to say that mandatory, and the important word is mandatory. Mandatory death sentence is unconstitutional. Meaning that if you are convicted of murder, the interpretation of the law as it was before December 2017 was once you are convicted, the court has no other responsibility except to sentence you to death. What the court said in Francis Muruate is actually the court has a discretion. They can determine to sentence you to death or a lesser penalty. Meaning that that's the decision for the court. And that's the decision that Judge Lesit exercised. Looking at the circumstances, he said, in my view, I think this is an aggravated circumstance. For that reason, I will listen to the mitigating circumstances, but I will disregard them. Because I think you stabbed this person 25 times, blah, 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 blah. For that reason, you are entitled to mandatory death sentence. That is in accord with the judgment. The judgment says, let the judge determine based on facts. Do we jail you for mandatory death or do we give you a lesser punishment? I think that's the first issue. Having said so, there are three other things that the judgment said that we should keep in mind, and then I'll come to the debate on the death sentence. The second thing the court said is, you know, what happens to those who have been jailed for death mandatorily, and as some says, they are still in jail because that decision has never been effected because nobody has been hanged for over 20 years. The court says, let's have a process of sentence rehearing, which is to go back and not debate whether you were guilty of murder or not, but to look at the mitigating circumstances and determine, should you be convicted for death by hanging or should you be given a lesser penalty? And that process, there are two things going. There are certain judges who are actually doing sentence rehearing across the entire country. That's already ongoing. But two, the court then said, let the Attorney General establish a process of ensuring that we have this rehearing. And they were given a year to do so. The former Attorney General, before he left, Professor Gidu, appointed a task force in March to try and do the sentence rehearing. We haven't heard much about it. So I think the first thing that needs to happen is that it needs to expedite his work so that we can be able to deal with those who had been convicted for death and are still in court. The third thing the court did, which I think is fundamental, it then said, but even if we reduce it to life imprisonment, how long is life? Should it be for all your life? Or should it be for a period of time? In some countries, they even say that if it's life in prison, let it be 40 years. And the court said, that's a legitimate conversation, but it's not a conversation for us. That's a conversation for the legislature. So the legislature can be able to determine, should life actually mean the full life? And why that's important is because the decision as to whether we should have mandatory death sentence, whether we should have not mandatory, whether we should have death sentence as the penalty or not, is a conversation for Kenya. And unfortunately, as Kenyans, we sometimes like shirking responsibility. As Irungu told you, when we were at Bomas, all of us said we are against the removal of the death sentence. We continue keeping it. If you read Article 26 of the Constitution, there's contest, but Article 26 envisages situations where life can be taken away. Meaning, we have refused to accept that we don't need to continue having death sentence. But when the judiciary exercises that function, we complain about it, but yet we want it. The same thing that some said, if you go to the Sexual Offences Act, the Sexual Offences Act also has a mandatory sentence where the judiciary has no responsibility. And if you go across the entire jails, a lot of the people in jail currently are because of that Sexual Offences Act, because we remove discretion. I think for a long time, we have insisted as a country that the only way to deal with the criminals is punishment. We think the purpose of the criminal justice system is a punishment aspect, and it's time for us to look ourselves in the eye and say, it's actually wrong. People who commit crime make mistakes. And when you make mistakes, even if you sin, there's an opportunity for penitence. You go and repent and you are forgiven. I think the criminal justice system must give us an opportunity to be punished, but also an opportunity for us to be rehabilitated. That's why there's a whole conversation in this country about alternatives to imprisonment, where people are given parole, people are given community service orders, and that gives us the opportunity also of saying it is time for us to actually tell ourselves that the death sentence may have been useful in the past, but I think it is such a grave punishment that we should consider removing from our statute books. It's a conversation for all of us.
For all of us.
Not just for one entity.
But looking at a scale, if we come to you, Lucy, because the circumstances that we have on this as well, and we're not in any way trying to play the judge, the jury, and the hangman on this particular discussion as well. First of all, the circumstances that also worried that there was an allusion to that Farid was infected by HIV, which is not really confirmed. I do not know, but also I think from the article we raised this particular point as well. Given maybe the nature that she was in at that particular time, and given the circumstances after getting this revelation that yes, maybe she's infected with HIV/AIDS, and there's a story of course sort of two timings that was happening in this particular relationship. From a psychological perspective, what would be your assertion, or maybe what would be assessment, I should say?
Well, I think let me first begin by saying that the taking away of somebody's life does not humanize anybody concerned. And I've really been thinking about this issue and thinking about the family of Farid. He was an orphan, but there are people who loved him. There was an uncle. And, I constantly think about how their grieving must be complicated by everything that is going on. Because, to be honest, both families have lost. And we can never truly feel their loss because, we didn't lose anything, and we keep discussing this whole thing. Some discussions are useful, some are not. Coming back to, I want to have that conversation from like on a three-tier sort of fashion. Mm-hmm. Number one, what has happened with Kamande and Farid is not unique. We have a problem of spouses killing each other in this country. Let's start from there. Trust was broken, that is fine. But there is this idea that, when you listen to her story, it seems like there was some sort of obsession that was going on. But also for somebody to resort in solving a problem by taking another person's life, that's something that we need to talk about. We hear stories about the way the neighbors were trying to stop her and things like that, the way she stabbed him slowly. I have not seen a psychological or psychiatric report on this matter. Irungu, you're saying that she has reformed because she's doing paralegal work and, she did this, she did that, which is cool. But are we sure that under the same circumstances where her defense mechanisms are going to be overwhelmed, will she choose a different option? For me, that is what rehabilitation is. Do we have the mechanisms of being able to rehabilitate people? Anybody and everybody can be rehabilitated. People make mistakes. But also, we live in a society where there's so much trauma that people are growing up with that acting out seems to be the only option that people have in solving problems. So for me, I don't see it as a Kamande problem. I see it as a problem that is happening with couples. There are situations where in a relationship there's violence going on, emotional, financial, physical, and then people ask, why does somebody stay? But the question I am asking is, where can people go? Are we creating also, is it possible for us to create safe spaces, sanctuaries, where people can actually go to not let situations escalate? The issue that we are seeing now is an end result. And now we are talking about how to address that end result. But I want us to dig deeper and ask ourselves, how can we begin to help people have healthier relationships with each other and with themselves, so that we can be able to have a system that does not necessarily have to punish people. So, anybody can be rehabilitated, but I think we need a larger conversation, not just do we remove the death penalty, do we not, but also how do we help people to become better human beings?
Mm-hmm. Let's say from Tom Kagwe.
I think, Debarl, my views have never changed. One day I was asked by the Catholic Church to do a research. That time there was ongoing debate in Bomas. I did a paper on the death penalty, and I came to realize that our country is those typified as abolitionist in practice. Abolitionists in practice are countries that have the death sentence in their law books, but they don't practice it. Just like my colleagues have said, it's over 20 years. So what we have been doing is practicing abolition of the death penalty without removing it from our books. And you can see from even during the 10 years of Kibaki, this is now 7 years of Uhuru, there is no one day they have ever assigned somebody to be hanged. In fact, Kibaki commuted people to life sentence. So it tells you about our psyche. But in that research, I came to realize that there are countries which have completely abolished, including their law books. There are countries which have not abolished. But the flip side of this is this, and I like putting it in a very simple way. Do you know we have been paying executioners a salary for the last 20 years, and they have never executed anyone? We have hangmen. I don't know whether we have hang women, but we have hangmen in jails, and we pay them a salary every month for doing nothing.
But the report is that we don't have a hangman right now, do we?
No, we have hangmen.
We do have.
I'm sure jails have a payroll here, hangman. So that tells you about, but for me, both from a religious point of view as a Catholic, but also from a human rights point of view, there is no way I'll ever advocate for the death penalty. Because essentially, whoever gives life, let's just proceed the way it is. If you kill someone, I think we should sentence you for life or something like that. But taking away your life does not bring another life. No. So for me, it has been like that since I was young, and I've never changed my views. Even after joining the human rights movement, in fact, I solidified my views further. So it's about, I don't know how to put it in a better way. Life is precious. Article 26 of the Constitution, we try to debate on this matter, but Kenyans one day will reopen this constitution, maybe in 10 years.
All right.
In 2020, we reopen these discussions and agree on the way forward, because we have never hanged somebody for 20 years. Yes. We pay some people's salary for 20 years for doing nothing. So let's agree as a country we have already abolished. The only thing that is still in the penal code, I think it's at section 204, something like that, or section 240, can't remember. Yeah. Right.
And of course, actually, it's 21 years, because I think the last person that was hanged was in 1987.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, in light of this, because now you're actually seeking, the commuting of this particular sentence, yes, to life sentence right now. The Supreme Court ruling also, the government was ordered to review all current death sentences cases, meaning that the convicts on death row will get another day in court. I don't know if this could be another maybe light at the end of a tunnel with this particular, of course, case that you're pushing. That is Amnesty International. Also, some Mohochi, you can tell us on this as well, because it seems maybe we are speaking from both sides of the mouth. Yet here is the Supreme Court is saying we can review the current death sentences. Here again, we have another death sentence now that it seems, yes, the death knell is on. It has to happen. Which way to go?
I think we are in interesting times. For starters, we should all recall from 2003 that the head of state then would periodically exercise his presidential powers of mercy and commute a significant number of death sentences to life. So that has been happening, but in an erratic manner, and it's not been consistent. So I tend to think that the Muruatetu decision, yes, basically provides the jab that will catalyze the relevant agencies to reconsider sentencing for the entire lot of individuals on death row.
Yes.
That in itself eases the burden from the executive and the president, who has been periodically exercising his powers of mercy to commit these sentences from death to life. So that presents that opportunity. But each case shall be treated on its own merit, and I think the lawyers who represented these individuals then have to prepare to present the mitigating circumstances that would inform the resentencing. Yeah.
All right. Yes, Collins Odote?
I think there is a slight distinction. The resentencing that the Supreme Court ordered are for cases that were committed to death, because by then the interpretation of Section 204 was that the judge had no discretion. In this instance, the judge actually exercised a discretion, appreciating that I can be able to sentence you to death or not, and having made that decision, they decided to take them to death. So I think the option for her is not a sentence rehearing. The option is actually an appeal, and an appeal to make the debate. And if you look at the Murotetu judgment, one of the things that actually the court never dealt with is the instance where even if you are sentenced to death and you are continuing to be held for life imprisonment, is that constitutional or not? And I think this case may give us the opportunity of dealing with that aspect of the issue. So here is a situation where the court has actually now exercised the position. So I think as opposed to dealing with the sentence rehearing, we should be focusing much more on two things. We should be focusing, one, on the appeal, because through the appeal process, we will deal with this debate about mandatory death sentence, because all of us on this panel agree it's unconstitutional, or at least it should not be in our statute books. Right. And the second way of dealing with it is to then also put pressure on Parliament, because they were given the opportunity for us to reopen this debate. I don't think we should wait until 2020. I think normally a crisis gives you an opportunity of dealing with something you've been putting your eyes away from. And I think this case gives us the opportunity of dealing with that issue, because I think the debate is not whether the judge was wrong or not. No. The debate is whether we should continue having that kind of penalty in our statute. But I think for me this is the perfect opportunity for us to be able to deal with both the appellate process and for us to deal with the legislative process, and hopefully through that process get rid of mandatory death sentence. We don't need it.
All right. Does it then mean we've crossed the Rubicon when they say that now this is irreversible? Once it has been pronounced, does it mean we've crossed the Rubicon, we have to go full steam ahead with the hangman? Or what is the other legal avenues? Perhaps if something or other evidence arises and in light of the pronounced judgment, does it mean that would also hold sway on the judgment?
I mean, I think if the appeal is not upheld or is not successful, then we are back in the predictable process of Ruth Kamande and all the other cases, and there have been many other cases. I mean, we've been accused as Amnesty of just focusing on this one individual, but actually our point is a broader public interest point. There are many people who are on death row at the moment. But I think in this case, what will happen is if the appeal is not successful, predictably what will happen is the president will probably commute her sentence and the sentences of the 4,500 that Sam has spoken about,
yes,
to life imprisonment. I think this has happened on two occasions, in 2009 and 2016. The wisdom of the two presidents, Kibaki and Kenyatta, they commuted these cases. This will probably happen again. The question is really whether or not, as I think Collins is saying, we need to streamline our laws in line with our democratic national values, which do not uphold death penalty as a sentence for any crime. Whether it be murder, robbery with violence, oathing, treason, any of those cases. I think we have other ways in which we can handle cases like that, and there are enough statutes, I think, to deal with people like that, and also rehabilitation and corrective methods that are being used across the world that we are also using, that will actually lead to the situation where somebody can walk out decades after they've committed a crime and actually be a law-abiding, human person that is compassionate and caring for their community.
Right. And of course, we've seen that window of opportunity. We wanted to say something, Lucy? Yeah,
yes,
briefly.
I did. I worked at the Mathare Maximum Security Unit. This is basically where people who have been deemed to not have had their faculties intact when they committed a crime are taken. And I don't mean to minimize what she did, but people have done worse things, right? So how that system works is that it enables people to get an opportunity to get treatment if they are not well. For me, I can't imagine a circumstance where she was well. And if she was, then it means she's a psychopath. You know what I'm saying? So I think what I'm saying is that it's important to link the judiciary with, the reforming of people, the rehabilitation of them, as in there has to be a complete circle. Social workers have to be involved. I know that there are psychologists and counselors in the probation offices, but what I know is that they have such meager resources, not just to move around to listen to communities and to reconcile them, because let me tell you, reconciliation needs to happen. Because, you know, I really hope like Farid's family is not watching the discussion that Kenyans are having, because they're acting like they're the ones who've been hurt the most, you know. But in truth, these people have been hurt so much. They are the people who should be like demanding that this person be thrown in a hole and the hole to be thrown away. But them coming to that grieving process where they can begin to accept that loss and try to make sense of it all, they also need that kind of care. So we need a system that also cares for people who are so deeply hurt by this that has happened, because I feel that discussion has ignored them wholly. And when I talk about them, I'm also talking about all the other families who've been so hurt when these kind of things happen. What about them? Where is the conversation about them? So let's have a holistic conversation. That's all I'm saying. And let's link everything with the intention of actually making us more human, not more punitive.
Okay. Unless we of course, don't have any other sentiment on this, we can actually go full steam ahead. But also it brings to bear other issues that may really come to the fore. And I know we've not really grappled with the issue of, let's say, euthanasia, the massive killings as well. How does also the law address euthanasia? Because it will reach a point where there has to be a massive killing at some point, because one way or the other, somebody is vegetative, is accumulating hospital bills, and there is a thin issue of the sanctity of life itself. So how also does the law really capture this in light of the current constitution that we do have? Also, that will be another Pandora's box that cannot be addressed. As soon as we know that this can be another point of discussion and debate, the sooner the better that we address it so far. Maybe briefly on that, then we move on to other discussions.
I think
very briefly.
When I was studying philosophy, there are three debates which never end in the entire world. One is on abortion. The other one is on death sentence. And the third one is euthanasia. From my perspective, and this is my personal opinion, God is the author of life. We can't play God. That's something that I have in a conviction all my life, that regardless of what we think as human beings, we know who is the author of life. Maybe for those who believe, those who don't believe, I don't know. But for me, where I come from, and after studying philosophy for over 7 years, that's my conclusion. And this is where you debate things logically and everything.
Right.
But I came to that conclusion.
Does the Constitution, let's see here from Sam, does the Constitution in any way capture euthanasia, the massive killing, or this will be another way now that will need an amendment? I don't know. Maybe the legal minds will tell us here. Very briefly before we move on. Sam.
I don't think so, but I think it's an interesting phenomena, because if I would just compound it slightly further, in our statute books, in our criminal penal code, for example, attempted suicide is a criminal offense.
Right.
However, if the accused person was successful, the state is no longer interested. So it will only be an issue of the family going to bury the individual. And we've been having conversations of the psychological triggers of attempted suicide and the role of the state. And I think that is also where euthanasia will come in. We have individuals that might have been terminally ill to the extent that they just wish it was over. And who makes that call? The current constitutional and legal framework in Kenya is such that anyone attempting to make such a call can easily be arraigned in court and charged with attempted suicide. That is the patient, the terminally ill patient, because we do preserve the right to life in the Constitution, and the parameters in which that life can be taken away must equally be provided for in a law. So that when we talk about parameters of taking away life in Kenya, we look at the criminal law in which it enables the state in certain set of circumstances to take away life. That then means we shall get to a point where we will also have to have that kind of conversation.
Thank you, thank you. Collins Odote, very briefly on this.
I think Article 26 of the Constitution deals with 2 of the 3 issues that Kagwe dealt with in his philosophy. And it's interesting about the position he adopts. But the issue about death, we spoke about. The issue about abortion is actually dealt with in Article 26.3 of the Constitution, if my memory serves me well. And there's a whole debate between the church and the rest of society. And I think what Article 26 does is that it actually permits abortion in certain instances. Euthanasia is not dealt with in the Constitution. But if you look at the penal code actually makes euthanasia illegal. So in my understanding, you can't be able to kill somebody out of mercy. But I think the point that you are raising is, as we debate the mandatory death sentence, I think it's important for us to put all the 3 together, and put the 3 together in terms of A, what does it mean for our values as a society? B, what does it mean for modern trends? And 3, what does that then mean for the law? Because the law must balance between 2. The law must balance between our values and modern trends.
Right. Lucy, briefly?
I just wanted to pick up from where Tom Kagwe spoke. And I respect what you're saying, but I've dealt with people who are terminally ill and they demand to actually be released. And you can't ignore that, because that is people suffering. So for me, what I'm saying is that let's not be absolute. Let's leave it up to conversation, because it's the right thing to do.
Right, so they demand to be released, and
Yes.
then we're caught in between also
They do.
the rigors of law that say euthanasia is illegal.
And we have to stop criminalizing suicide as well, because this is a mental health issue. You don't criminalize a mental health issue. It's not helping advance mental health wellness.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Right, I think we need to move on. Just also to read some of the reactions that we have on Twitter here. Morena Mwix is saying we really need the penalty. It's worth it. We can't live in a country that one person sits down and contemplates on how to kill the other. It is unacceptable. Every life matters. Beauty is just an adjective. And of course, also this drew a lot of flack, because people were saying, why are we really particularly intent on Ruth Kamande's case? Is it because she's a raving beauty, easy on the eye? This was the whole debate also on social media. We have also Bunga Brian saying death sentence is to sound a warning. If someone could have been hanged before then, Farid would be alive by now. Let's not pardon her just because of her beauty. She committed a crime that can only be punishable by death. Benji Dolo here says the death sentence is a fantastic deterrent to capital crime. To simplify, premeditated murder can lead a nation into anarchy, especially with a crazed drug-embracing, stressed-out, bulging youth population. We have also the ICJ saying different schools of thought have emerged regarding the effectiveness of death penalty. Those pro have based their argument on its use as a deterrent, while those against argue it is as fundamental human right violation to the right of life. Madambo, I don't support the death penalty. One reason, because innocent people have been on the death row. We have Stephen as well. That sentence was a colonial tool, but it is still the best of all. We are congesting our prisons with the murderers. Right. Then we have John Gidanga finally saying moral compass in our society today is perceived as an outdated aspect. Unfortunately, the church is getting worldly and the world is getting churchy. Our political leaders are no longer leaders. They are seeking, they're seekers of wealth and grandiosity. That is John Gidanga there. Thank you very much for your tweets as well. I don't know.
But that just tells you how difficult that conversation is.
Yes.
It's not easy.
Very difficult.